Hey everyone, and welcome back to Western Flavors. Before we get into our new episode, let's recap the tense and powerful events of our last story. We followed the man known as Benjamin on his dangerous secret journey from Montana to Alberta. After a grueling nighttime crossing, he was helped by a kind truck driver who, in a shocking coincidence, not only knew of Amy Fleming but confirmed that Heartland was a real place. However, a night alone in a motel triggered a torrent of new terrifying memories of violence and cruelty from his captivity, mixing with the beautiful, fragmented memories of his family. The story ended on a massive cliffhanger, with Ty just miles from Heartland, but choosing to walk away, determined to understand the darkness of his own past before bringing it to Amy's doorstep. If you missed that incredible, suspenseful story, the full playlist is linked for you in the description below. If you're enjoying this new season, please take a second to hit that like button and be sure to subscribe so you never miss a chapter. Now today, 2 weeks have passed. Ty has built a new, anonymous life, but a chance encounter is about to shatter his world all over again. 2 weeks. It had been 2 weeks since Ty had stood at that dusty crossroads, the map to his old life in his hand, and had made the conscious, painful decision to walk away. 2 weeks of a new, harsh and punishing reality. He had found a small, shabby, one-bedroom apartment in a rundown building on the industrial outskirts of Calgary, a place that smelled of damp concrete and boiled cabbage. The rent was cheap, and the landlord asked no questions, which was all that mattered. The apartment was a transient space, a place of profound and soul-crushing anonymity. It contained a lumpy mattress on the floor, a single, scarred wooden chair, and the meager contents of his duffel bag. It was not a home. It was a holding cell. His days were a blur of hard, relentless, and mind-numbing physical labor. He had found work as a day laborer on a massive downtown construction site, a sprawling skeleton of steel and concrete that was slowly, painstakingly, being transformed into a glittering new skyscraper. The work was brutal, the hours were long, and the pay was just enough to cover his rent and cheap food. But for Ty, the physical punishment was a welcome distraction. It was a way to silence the chaotic, violent storm that was now raging in his own mind. The memories, once a gentle, tantalizing trickle, had become a torrent. The flashes of his old life, the beautiful golden moments, were now constantly, violently, intercut with the dark, terrifying fragments of his captivity. He would be hauling a heavy bag of cement, his muscles screaming in protest, and he would suddenly be hit with the brilliant, sun-drenched image of Amy's laughing face, a memory so real, so powerful, it would almost knock him off his feet. And then, a second later, that beautiful image would be ripped away, replaced by the cold, sterile whiteness of the room where he was held, the glint of a needle in a doctor's hand, a feeling of such profound, terrifying helplessness that a cold sweat would break out on his skin. He was a man living in two worlds at once, a man haunted by both a paradise he had lost and a hell he had survived, and he understood neither. He knew, with a certainty that settled in his bones, that he would not bring this chaos to Heartland's door. He could not look into the eyes of the woman from his beautiful memories until he had conquered the demons from his terrible ones. So he worked. He pushed his body to its absolute limits, hoping that the physical exhaustion would be enough to finally, blessedly, grant him a few hours of dreamless, empty sleep. The new life he had built was a grim, solitary, and monastic existence. He would wake before dawn in his empty, gray room. He would work until his body was a single, screaming ache. And he would return to his empty apartment at night, too tired to do anything but stare at the water-stained ceiling and wait for the inevitable nightly assault of his own fractured memories. It was a Tuesday, 2 weeks into this new, punishing routine. The sun was high and hot in the sky, a brilliant, unforgiving glare that reflected off the glass of the surrounding office towers. The construction site was a cacophony of noise, the roar of machinery, the percussive clang of steel on steel, the shouts of the foreman. Ty was part of a crew working on the ground level, his job for the day to unload a truckload of heavy steel beams, his muscles coiled and straining with the effort. He was so focused on the work, so lost in the simple, brutal physics of lifting and carrying, that he barely registered the world outside the perimeter of the construction site. But during a brief water break, as he stood wiping the sweat and grime from his face with the back of a rough glove, his gaze drifted across the street. The restaurant opposite the site was a different universe. It was an upscale, elegant establishment, its large, clean windows looking out onto a patio adorned with bright flowers and sophisticated clientele. It was a world of clean clothes, of quiet conversations, of a life so far removed from his own gritty reality that it might as well have been on another planet. It was in that moment that a sleek, dark blue pickup truck pulled up to the curb. The passenger door opened and a woman stepped out. And the world stopped. Everything, the roar of the generator, the clang of the hammers, the shouts of the other workers, it all faded into a distant, muted hum. The only thing that was real was her. A woman with brilliant, sun-gold hair, wearing a simple, elegant blue summer dress. He didn't recognize her, not in a conscious, logical way, but his soul did. It was a feeling of profound, instantaneous, and completely overwhelming recognition, a deep cellular-level knowledge that this person, this beautiful stranger, was inexplicably, fundamentally important. It was the woman from his dream, the woman from the photograph. The woman whose name was a constant, aching whisper in his heart, Amy. He stood frozen, a statue of dirt and sweat, his gaze locked on her, unable to move, unable to breathe. He watched as she turned back to the truck, a beautiful, easy smile on her face. A man got out of the driver's side. He was handsome, well-dressed in a way that spoke of quiet, effortless money, his face clean-shaven, his dark hair perfectly styled. He looked like he belonged in this world of fancy restaurants and expensive trucks. Ty didn't recognize him at all. He didn't see the kind, familiar face of the rancher he had once, in another lifetime seen through a pair of binoculars. He just saw a stranger, a man who was clearly with the woman who haunted his every waking thought. He watched as the man, Nathan, placed a gentle, familiar hand on the small of her back, guiding her towards the restaurant. He watched as they laughed at something the man said, a shared, intimate moment of easy, comfortable connection. And he felt a surge of an emotion so powerful, so primal, that it almost buckled his knees. It was a raw, possessive, and deeply illogical jealousy, the territorial rage of a man seeing another man with a woman he knew, on some deep, forgotten level, was his. He was a mess. His world, which had been a simple, brutal routine of work and exhaustion, had just been shattered by a single, impossible glimpse of a past he couldn't remember and a present he couldn't bear to witness. He was a ghost, watching his own life being lived by someone else, and he was completely and utterly powerless to do a thing about it. The world, which had just been a chaotic, roaring symphony of construction, was now a silent film. Ty stood frozen on the dusty edge of the worksite, a half-eaten sandwich forgotten in his hand, his entire universe narrowed to the single, impossible figure of the woman across the street. The bright, sun-gold hair, the simple elegance of her blue summer dress, the way she moved with a quiet, unassuming grace, it was all a direct, powerful echo of the ghost that had been haunting his dreams. It was her, the woman whose name was a constant, aching whisper in his heart, Amy. He watched, transfixed, as the man with her, the handsome, well-dressed stranger, placed a gentle, familiar hand on the small of her back, guiding her towards the restaurant. He watched as they laughed at something the man said, a shared, intimate moment of easy, comfortable connection. And he felt a surge of an emotion so powerful, so primal, that it almost buckled his knees. It was a raw, possessive, and deeply illogical jealousy, the territorial rage of a man seeing another man with a woman he knew, on some deep, forgotten level, was his. He didn't understand the feeling. He had no right to it. He was a ghost, a man with no history, no claim on anyone. But the feeling was there, undeniable, and all-consuming. He felt a desperate, overwhelming need to get a closer look, to confirm that what he was seeing was real, to understand why the sight of this beautiful stranger was tearing his own soul apart. He dropped his sandwich into the dirt, the movement unconscious, and began to walk towards the edge of the construction site, his gaze locked on the restaurant window where they had just disappeared from view. His heart was pounding a heavy, frantic rhythm against his ribs. He felt like a man walking towards a cliff edge, compelled by a force he could not name. He reached the makeshift plywood barrier that separated the chaos of the site from the clean, orderly sidewalk of the city. He stood there, peering through a gap in the boards, and he could see them. They were being seated at a table right by the window, a perfect, sun-drenched diorama of a life he wasn't a part of. He could see her profile, the gentle curve of her cheek, the way she smiled as the man Nathan pulled out her chair for her. He was so focused, so completely and utterly consumed by the sight of her, that the world around him once again began to fade. The noise of the city, the shouts of the other workers, it all became a distant, muted hum. He stared, and as he stared, something in his mind began to shift. The image of the elegant woman in the restaurant began to blur, to flicker, to merge with another, more powerful image from the deep, locked archives of his memory. And then it hit him. A memory. Not a dream, not a fragment, but a full, vivid, and overwhelming scene, replaying in his mind with a sensory detail that was so powerful, it was like being struck by lightning. The air smells of old hay and dust. The light is dim, slanting through the high, dirty windows of a barn. And she is there. Younger, her hair is in a messy ponytail, a smudge of dirt on her cheek. She is not smiling. She is looking at him with an expression of fierce, defiant, and deeply wounded pride. He is a boy, a troubled, angry boy, and she is a girl who is just as broken, just as proud as he is. He can feel the rough, worn wood of a stall door under his hand. He can hear the soft, nervous nicker of a horse in the background, and he can feel the powerful, undeniable, and instantaneous pull towards her, a recognition of a kindred spirit, a fellow survivor. It is the very first time they have ever laid eyes on each other. The force of the memory was a physical blow. It was so real, so vivid, that it knocked the breath from his lungs. He stumbled back a step, a low, involuntary groan escaping his lips. He blinked, and the barn was gone. The defiant, young girl was gone. He was back on the hot, noisy construction site, his heart hammering, his body drenched in a cold sweat. He looked back towards the restaurant window, and he saw her. The same face, the same soul, older, changed, but undeniably, fundamentally, the same person. He knew her. He had known her before. He didn't know how, he didn't know when, but the memory was a solid, irrefutable truth. The need to get closer, to understand, was no longer a vague emotional pull. It was a desperate physical necessity. He pushed through the makeshift gate of the construction site and walked out onto the clean, bright sidewalk. He was a jarring, discordant note in the symphony of the city. He was covered in a fine layer of concrete dust. His face was grimy with sweat, his clothes were stained and torn, and he smelled of hard, physical labor. He was a creature from a different, grittier world. He walked with a singular, focused purpose, his eyes locked on the restaurant window. He didn't notice the stares of the well-dressed pedestrians, the way they gave him a wide berth, their faces a mixture of pity and distaste. He reached the large, polished glass window of the restaurant and, without a thought for the absurdity of his actions, he placed his large, dirty, and calloused hands on the clean glass, cupping them around his eyes to peer inside, to get a better look at the ghost who was sitting right in front of him. He saw her face, just a few feet away, animated as she spoke to the handsome man across from her, and the sight of her so close, so real, was so overwhelming that he didn't even notice the man in the sharp suit who had appeared at his side until the man spoke, his voice a low, firm, and deeply unimpressed command. "Sir, you can't do that. You need to move along." Ty didn't even hear him at first. He was completely lost in the world on the other side of the glass. The security guard, a large, imposing man with a no-nonsense expression, took a half-step closer. "I said, you need to leave. Now. You're disturbing our guests." He placed a firm, heavy hand on Ty's shoulder. The physical contact was a jolt, snapping Ty out of his trance. He turned, his eyes wide with a dazed, profound confusion.
I need to see."
"You need to see the other side of the street. Let's go." The guard's grip was like iron. He was not a man who was interested in explanations. He began to firmly, professionally, and non-negotiably escort Ty away from the window, his presence a clear and decisive message. "You do not belong here." Ty was too disoriented, too overwhelmed by the violent, chaotic storm of his own returning memories, to resist. He allowed himself to be led, a confused, passive participant in his own public humiliation. He was a ghost, a dirty, unwelcome specter from another world, being exorcised from the clean, bright world of the living. He was escorted to the edge of the curb, a final, firm pressure on his back, a clear, final warning. "Do not come back." The guard turned and walked back to his post, his duty done. Ty stood on the edge of the street, the traffic whizzing by, his heart pounding, his mind a complete and utter blank. The memory, the woman, the feeling of profound, impossible recognition, it was all a chaotic, swirling mess. He had been so close to something, an answer, a piece of his own lost soul, and he had been cast out, rejected, deemed unworthy to even look at it through a pane of glass. He was a stranger, and the world had just made it very, very clear that he was not welcome. Inside the elegant, sun-drenched restaurant, the world was a picture of calm, sophisticated peace. The quiet hum of conversation, the gentle clinking of silverware on porcelain, the soft, unobtrusive jazz music playing in the background, it was all a carefully curated symphony of relaxed, upscale dining. Amy, seated at the pristine white linen draped table by the window, felt like she was a million miles away from the dusty, chaotic, and emotionally complicated reality of her life at Heartland. For a few precious hours, she was not a grieving widow, not a struggling single mother, not a woman torn between her past and her future. She was just a woman, enjoying a beautiful meal in a beautiful place with a handsome, attentive man. Nathan was in his element. He was charming, he was witty, and he was completely, utterly focused on her. He had chosen the restaurant with care, ordered a bottle of wine he knew she would love, and guided the conversation with an easy, effortless grace. This was a deliberate, calculated campaign to win her heart, and it was a masterful performance. He spoke of his own plans for his ranch, of a new breeding program he was starting, subtly painting a picture of a shared future, of two powerful equestrian families in the foothills joining forces. He was not just offering her a romance, he was offering her a partnership, an empire.
Wow, Nathan. That's incredibly ambitious. A whole new line of show jumpers. The initial investment must be huge.
It is, but you have to take big risks to get big rewards. And I believe in what I'm building. What we could build together.
The wheel was a subtle but significant shift. Amy felt a small, pleasant flutter in her stomach, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a very long time. It was nice to be courted. It was nice to feel, even for a moment, like the heroine of a simple, uncomplicated love story. It was in the middle of this pleasant, romantic bubble that the small, ugly intrusion from the outside world occurred. Amy was laughing at a funny story Nathan was telling when she saw a flicker of movement at the large window beside their table. She glanced over and saw a man, a construction worker, his face grimy with dirt and sweat, his hands pressed against the clean glass as he peered inside. She felt a brief, reflexive flicker of annoyance at the intrusion, a common enough occurrence in the city. A moment later, she saw the restaurant's security guard, a large, imposing man, firmly but professionally escort the worker away from the window. The entire event lasted less than 10 seconds. She dismissed it from her mind almost instantly, a small, insignificant piece of urban unpleasantness, and turned her attention back to Nathan's charming smile. She had no idea she had just been a part of a moment of profound, life-altering significance. She had no idea that the dirty construction worker was the ghost she had been seeing in the stars. The meal continued, a perfect sun-drenched interlude in her complicated life. Nathan was a perfect gentleman, his conversation engaging, his compliments sincere but not overbearing. He was making it very, very easy for her to imagine a future with him. A future that was calm and successful and full of beautiful sunlit lunches in fancy restaurants. A future that was a world away from the deep, soulful, and often painful complexities of the love she had once known. It was only as they were finishing their coffee that a shadow of the old world intruded.
So,
He began, his tone shifting to something more serious, more intimate.
I know things have been complicated since the other night, and I just want you to know I meant what I said. I hope you'll let me be more than just a friend.
He reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. His touch was warm and steady and full of a quiet, confident promise.
Nathan,
She started, the easy, romantic fantasy of the lunch suddenly giving way to the messy, complicated reality of her own heart. But she didn't know how to finish. She was saved by the arrival of the waiter with the bill. The moment was broken. She gently pulled her hand back, giving him a small, non-committal but not unkind smile.
thank you for lunch. It was really lovely.
The conversation on the drive back to his truck was lighter, a return to the easy, friendly banter from before. But the question, his quiet, confident declaration, now hung in the air between them, an unanswered melody. He had made his move. The next one was hers. The pressure she had been trying to escape was quietly, gently, and inexorably closing in. The walk from the restaurant back to Nathan's truck was a short journey across a sun-drenched, bustling Calgary street. The pleasant, romantic bubble of their lunch had burst, leaving a new, slightly awkward and unresolved tension in its wake. Amy was acutely aware of Nathan walking beside her, of his quiet, confident presence, and of the weight of the unspoken question that now hung between them. He had made his intentions clear, and her own heart was a chaotic, tangled mess of conflicting loyalties and desires. She was so lost in her own thoughts that she was barely paying attention to the world around her. Across the street, the world of the construction site was a brutal, jarring contrast. The rhythmic clang of steel, the roar of heavy machinery, and the shouts of the foremen were a symphony of raw, physical effort. Ty had been unceremoniously dumped back on the sidewalk by the security guard, his mind a chaotic, violent storm of returning memories and raw, wounded emotion. The brief, humiliating encounter had left him feeling shaken, disoriented, and profoundly, deeply angry. He was a ghost, an unwelcome specter, and the world had just made it very clear that he was not allowed to even look at the life that had once been his. His coworker, a burly, no-nonsense man named Mac, saw him standing on the curb staring blankly into space. "Hey, Borden, you on a coffee break? There's a truck of rebar over here that ain't gonna unload itself. Let's go." The rough, impatient voice was a welcome, grounding anchor in the sea of Ty's confusion. He shook his head, trying to clear the fog, and turned back towards the site. He had to work. He had to lose himself in the simple, punishing reality of physical labor. It was the only thing that made sense. He and Mac began the grueling task of unloading the heavy, rusted lengths of rebar, their movements a practiced, rhythmic dance of lifting and carrying. For a few minutes, Ty was able to silence the ghosts. There was only the weight of the steel in his hands, the burn in his muscles, the sweat stinging his eyes. It was during one of these trips, as he was walking from the truck to the ever-growing pile of rebar, that his path intersected with a different reality once again. Across the street, Amy and Nathan had reached his truck. Nathan opened the passenger door for her, a small, gentlemanly gesture, and as she was about to get in, she looked up, her gaze for some unknown reason sweeping across the chaotic, noisy construction site, and their eyes met. For a single, heart-stopping and utterly impossible second, the world stood still. Across the 4 lanes of roaring city traffic, through the shimmering heat haze rising from the asphalt, Amy saw him. It wasn't a vision. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a face in the stars. It was a man, a dirty, bearded, and rugged construction worker, his face grimy with sweat, a hard hat casting a shadow over his features. But his eyes were impossible. They were the same deep, familiar, and haunted eyes of her late husband. They were Ty's eyes. Her heart stopped. The breath caught in her throat in a sharp, painful gasp. The bustling city street around her, the sound of the traffic, Nathan's voice beside her, it all faded into a distant, muted roar. The world was a tunnel, and at the other end of it were those eyes. It was a hallucination. It had to be. A waking ghost, a trick of her own grief-stricken, overstimulated mind. But it was so real, so terribly, beautifully, and heartbreakingly real. For Ty, the moment was just as profound, and 1,000 times more shocking. He was not expecting her to look back. He was not prepared for the full, direct force of her gaze. He saw the recognition in her eyes, the sheer, stunned disbelief, and the profound, instantaneous sorrow. She saw him. And in her seeing him, she confirmed the one, impossible truth he was still struggling to accept. She was real, and she knew him. A wave of pure, unadulterated panic crashed over him. This was not how this was supposed to happen. He was not ready. He was a mess, a ghost, a man who didn't even know his own story. He couldn't face her. Not like this. He broke eye contact instantly, his head snapping away, turning his back to her, presenting the anonymous, non-threatening posture of a stranger. He pretended to be focused on the rebar in his hands, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The moment was broken. Nathan, oblivious to the silent, life-altering drama that had just transpired, saw the look on Amy's face. He saw her go pale, saw the look of profound, shocked horror in her eyes as she stared, unseeing, at the construction site. He touched her arm, his voice full of a sudden, sharp concern.
Amy, what is it? What's wrong? You look like you've just seen a ghost.
The question, so innocent, so accurate, was what finally snapped her out of it. She blinked, and the vision was gone. There was just a construction site, a blur of anonymous, hard-hatted workers. The man with the impossible eyes was gone, lost in the chaos. She must have imagined it. She had to have imagined it. She turned to Nathan, forcing a weak, unconvincing smile. Her voice, when it came, was a trembling, breathless whisper.
Nothing. I'm fine. I'm just seeing things. The sun must be getting to me.
She quickly slid into the passenger seat of the truck, a desperate retreat from her own mind, from the ghost that was now haunting her in the bright, unforgiving light of day. Nathan looked at her, his brow furrowed with a deep, unsatisfied concern, but he didn't press. He closed the door, walked around to his side, and a moment later they were pulling out into the stream of traffic, leaving the construction site and the ghost of Ty Borden behind them. From the edge of the site, Ty watched them go, his own heart a chaotic, painful mess. He had been seen. The ghost was no longer invisible, and he had no idea what to do next. The dark blue truck disappeared into the stream of bustling Calgary traffic, leaving Ty standing on the edge of the construction site, a solitary, dust-covered statue in a world that had suddenly, irrevocably, changed. He stood there, his heart a wild, chaotic drum against his ribs. Long after the truck was gone, he was a man who had just seen a ghost, and the ghost was him. She had seen him, and he had seen her. The 4 years of separation, of amnesia, of a life lived as a stranger, had just been obliterated in a single, heart-stopping, 3-second glance. He was so lost in the violent, internal storm of the moment that he didn't even register his coworker, Mac, coming to stand beside him. Mac had seen the whole thing. He had seen Ty freeze, had seen him stare after the departing truck with an expression of such profound, naked shock that it had cut through his own usual gruff indifference. "Hey, Borden, you alright, man? You look like you just saw your own funeral." Ty didn't answer. He couldn't. His mind was a roaring, white-hot blank. Mac followed his gaze down the busy street, a slow, knowing, and slightly sassy grin spreading across his face. "Ah, I get it. You're starstruck. Can't say I blame you. She's a looker, that one. But you gotta be careful, man. Staring like that, you'll get a reputation. Stop ogling the celebrity before you get us all in trouble." The word, so casual, so out of place, was what finally broke through the fog of Ty's shock. He turned to Mac, his own face a mask of profound, dazed confusion.
Celebrity?
His voice was a low, rough croak.
Who is she?
Max stared at him, his own grin faltering, replaced by a look of genuine disbelieving bafflement. He looked from Ty's confused face to the road where the truck had been and back again. "Are you kidding me? You've been in Alberta for 2 weeks and you don't know who that is? Man, what rock have you been living under?" He gestured with his thumb down the road. "That's Amy Fleming, of course, the world-famous horse whisperer. From that big family ranch out in the foothills? Heartland. She's a local legend. My cousin took a horse to her once, said it was like watching a miracle." The words, each one a separate, percussive blow, landed on Ty with a devastating, clarifying force. Amy Fleming, Heartland, horse whisperer. The name from his dreams. The place the truck driver had told him about. The woman whose face had sparked a real, tangible memory. It was all the same person. The ghost he had been chasing was not just real, she was famous. Mac leaned in a little closer, his voice dropping to the conspiratorial, gossipy tone of a man sharing a juicy secret. "And tough as nails, too. You know, rumor has it that some prince or billionaire from Dubai offered her millions for her ranch, and for her. But she rejected him flat. Said her heart belonged to her now-deceased husband." The phrase deceased husband was a confusing, painful, and deeply unsettling piece of a puzzle he couldn't begin to solve. He didn't connect it to himself. How could he? In his mind, he was Benjamin Cooper, a man with no past. But the words still struck a strange, dissonant chord deep within him, a feeling of profound, inexplicable loss for a man he had never known, for a love story he had no part in. Ty's own voice was a quiet, hollowed-out echo, full of a tragic, profound irony that was completely lost on his coworker.
Must have been a lucky guy.
Mac just snorted, clapping him on the shoulder. "Not lucky enough, I guess. Anyway, come on. The rebar ain't gonna move itself." But Ty didn't move. He stood frozen, the weight of the new information pressing down on him. The sheer, overwhelming, and tragic absurdity of his situation was a wave that threatened to pull him under. The woman who had been a formless, beautiful dream was now a real person, a person with a history, a family, and a tragic past of her own. The connection he felt to her, which had been a strange but private mystery, was now a public, complicated fact. The plan he had made to find work, Get stable and investigate from a safe distance was now completely and utterly destroyed. He couldn't investigate this from a distance. He couldn't be rational. He had seen her, and seeing her had changed everything. He looked at Mac, his eyes wide with a new dawning urgency.
I got to go.
He said, the words a choked, desperate whisper. He turned and, without another thought for his job, for his paycheck, for anything other than the overwhelming, desperate need to understand the profound, impossible connection he felt to this woman, he began to walk away from the construction site. He was a man running, not from a truth he had discovered, but towards a mystery that had just become terrifyingly, beautifully real.